two sisters pose elegantly for a photograph. More than a century later, restorers enlarge the image and discover a hidden horror that will change everything. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Isabel Montero carefully adjusted her dust mask while inspecting the objects that had survived decades of abandonment in the Vidal mansion in Barcelona. As a restorer specializing in historical heritage, she had seen many manor houses in deplorable condition. But this residence, in particular, had something especially melancholic about it. The Vidal family had been among the most prominent in Barcelona at the beginning of the 20th century. Yet, the family line had mysteriously died out in the 1930s. The mansion, with its high ceilings and dusty stained glass windows, had remained closed for 90 years until the city council decided to restore it as a museum. "Isabel, come see this," shouted Carlos Ruiz, her assistant, from the first floor. "I found something interesting in the study." Isabel climbed the marble stairs, her steps echoing through the silence of the empty house. Carlos was kneeling beside a mahogany desk, examining a metal box hidden inside a secret compartment. "Look," said Carlos, showing her the contents. "Family photographs, documents. Some appear very old." Isabel took the first photograph from the pile. It was a sepia image showing two elegantly dressed girls posing in what appeared to be the mansion's garden. The girls, approximately 8 and 10 years old, wore white lace dresses with bows in their hair. The younger one held a porcelain doll, while the older maintained the rigid posture typical of the era. "The date on the back says June 1901, Carlos observed, turning the photograph over. "Catalina and Mercedes Vidal." Isabel examined the image more closely. There was something disturbing about the girls' expressions, particularly their eyes. It wasn't the usual seriousness seen in photographs from that era, but something deeper, more unsettling. "I need to examine this in more detail," murmured Isabel, placing the photograph in her work bag. "I'm going to take it to the laboratory and analyze it properly." That night in her restoration studio, Isabel scanned the photograph in high resolution. As she adjusted the contrast and brightness to improve the image quality, she began to notice details she hadn't seen with the naked eye. Her expression slowly changed from professional curiosity to growing concern. "This can't be," she whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Isabel arrived early at the laboratory the next morning, anxious to continue her analysis. She had spent a restless night, disturbed by what she had seen in the enlarged image. She needed to confirm her suspicions before jumping to conclusions. Using specialized digital restoration software, she examined each section of the photograph in microscopic detail. What she found left her breathless. The younger girl, Catalina, showed clear signs of severe malnutrition. Her gaunt face and sunken eyes contrasted sharply with her elegant dress. Even more disturbing was what appeared to be a skin rash on her neck and arms, barely visible beneath the lace. "Symptoms of scarlet fever," murmured Isabel, recognizing the signs of a disease that had been deadly to thousands of children at the beginning of the 20th century. But why is she posing for a photograph in that condition? Her attention then shifted to Mercedes, the older girl, when she enlarged the image. Isabel noticed what appeared to be discolored bruises on the girl's left arm, partially concealed by the dress sleeves. Even more unsettling was the expression of barely contained terror in Mercedes' eyes. Isabel leaned back in her chair, feeling a chill. As a mother of 2 daughters, she immediately recognized the signs of abuse and neglect. Yet, there was something more in the photograph that she couldn't fully identify. She decided to call Dr. Emilio Vasquez, medical historian at the University of Barcelona, specializing in 19th and 20th century diseases. If anyone could confirm her suspicions about the girl's condition, it was him. "Dr. Vasquez," said Isabel when he answered, "I need you to examine a historical photograph. I believe it shows signs of illness and possible child abuse from 1901. "Interesting," the doctor replied. In that era, family photographs were often taken to preserve memories before well. before it was too late, especially when children were ill. Isabel felt another chill. Post-mortem photographs. Not necessarily, he said, but photographs taken when it was known that time was running out. It was a common practice among wealthy families. Please bring me the image of preparing the photograph to show the doctor. Isabel couldn't help wondering what had happened to Catalina and Mercedes Vidal, and why their parents had chosen to take such an elaborate photograph when one of the girls was clearly ill. Dr. Emilio Vasquez examined the enlarged image with the meticulous attention of a forensic expert. As a specialist in medical history, he had seen hundreds of similar photographs, but few as disturbing as this one. Isabel, your instincts are correct, he finally said, pointing to Catalina's visible symptoms. This girl shows advanced signs of scarlet fever. Note the characteristic rash on the neck and the extreme pallor. In 1901, this would have been essentially a death sentence. Isabel gestured toward the bruises on Mercedes. The doctor adjusted his glasses and studied the older girl's arm carefully. These contusion patterns are consistent with a strong grip, he said, most likely from adult hands. Here, he pointed to a barely visible mark on Mercedes' cheek, which appeared to be the residue of a blow that had begun to heal. Are we seeing evidence of child abuse from over a century ago? Isabel asked, feeling nauseous. That appears to be the case. But there's something even more disturbing, the doctor continued. The composition of this photograph is very strange. Normally, a seriously ill child would be in bed, not posing for a formal portrait. And the fact that Mercedes also shows signs of physical trauma suggests this family had serious problems. Isabel studied the girls' expressions again. Their eyes seemed to be asking for help. Exactly. In my experience, when children in historical photographs showed this combination of fear and resignation, there were usually very serious circumstances in the home. The doctor leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Isabel, you need to investigate this family further. In 1901, wealthy families often hid illness and abuse to protect their social reputation. If these girls were suffering, it's possible no one officially documented what happened to them. Where should I look? Isabel asked. Parish records, obituaries from the era, hospital archives. You should also consult Barcelona's charity records. If these girls died or disappeared, there must be some documentary trace. Isabel carefully packed the photograph, determined to uncover the truth about Catalina and Mercedes Vidal, though part of her feared what she might find. Doctor, is there anything else I should know about the medical and family practices of that time? Dr. Vasquez looked at her seriously. In 1901, parents often took farewell photographs when they knew a child was going to die, but they never included other children in the image unless they intended everyone to appear together for the last time. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. The implication was clear and terrifying the next day. Isabel spent hours in the archives of the Sagrada Familia Basilica, where many aristocratic families of Barcelona had registered births, marriages, and deaths at the beginning of the 20th century. The archivist, Sister Carmen, had worked there for 40 years and knew the records better than anyone. The Vidal family appears frequently in our registers, Sister Carmen explained as she guided Isabel through the leather-bound volumes. They were important benefactors of the church, but now that you mention it, there's something strange about the entries from 1901. Isabel opened a register for June 1901 and found the entry she was searching for, Catalina Vidal Montini, 8 years old, daughter of Don Ramon Vidal and Donna Esperanza Montaner, deceased July 15, 1901, cause scarlet fever, a month after the photograph, murmured Isabel, calculating the dates. And Mercedes. Sister Carmen frowned. That's the problem. Mercedes appears in the birth records, but there's no death entry. She simply disappears from all documents after July 1901. Isabel continued reviewing the records and found something even more disturbing. Ramon Vidal had requested a special mass on July 20th, 1901, for the souls of his 2 daughters who have found eternal peace. 2 daughters? Isabel asked. But there's no death record for Mercedes. Exactly, Sister Carmen replied. In my 40 years here, I've seen this only in very specific cases when a family wanted the public to believe a child had died, but in reality had sent them away because of shame or scandal. Isabel felt she was closing in on something important. What kind of scandal could make an aristocratic family fake a daughter's death? Sister Carmen lowered her voice. Mental illness, physical deformities, behavior considered immoral, anything that could stain a family's reputation. Wealthy families had the means to hide problematic children in private institutions. Is there any record of where they might have sent Mercedes? You would need to consult charity archives and private institution records. But Isabel, I must warn you, what you may find could be very disturbing. Isabel packed her notes, more determined than ever. Sister Carmen, do you know any family stories about the Vidals that aren't in the official records? The nun hesitated. There are rumors passed down among the oldest families in the neighborhood. They say Ramon Vidal had a violent temper and that his wife, Esperanza, was fragile. There were stories of screams coming from the mansion, but nothing was ever officially investigated. What happened to the parents? Isabel asked. Ramon died in 1905, apparently of a heart attack. Esperanza disappeared shortly afterward. The mansion was closed, and the family line died out. No one ever spoke of it again. Isabel turned toward the exit, then stopped. Sister Carmen, do you think Mercedes could have survived? The nun looked at her with sad eyes. If she did, it would have been under very difficult circumstances. Institutions for children in 1901 were not places where children were sent to have a better life. The search led Isabel to the archives of Barcelona's old charity, now converted into a historical research center. The librarian, Dr. Montserrat Farah, had dedicated her career to studying Catalan charity institutions of the 19th and 20th centuries. The records from 1901 are particularly detailed, explained Dr. Farah, as she guided Isabel through shelves filled with documents. It was a terrible year for Barcelona families. The scarlet fever epidemic killed hundreds of children, and many families were forced to make desperate decisions. Isabel explained her investigation into the Vidal girls. Dr. Farah's expression gradually darkened as she listened. Vidal? Yes, I remember that name. There's a very unusual entry in our records from August 1901. The doctor pulled out a large volume and opened it to a marked page. Here it is. Mercedes Vidal Monter, 10 years old, admitted by family request. Reason: abnormal behavior following family trauma. Condition: selective mutism and episodes of night terror. Isabel felt her skin crawl. Abnormal behavior following family trauma in 1901 terminology. This meant the girl had witnessed or experienced something deeply traumatizing. Selective mutism was common in children who had suffered severe abuse. Dr. Farah continued reading. According to the record, Mercedes was admitted to the Santa Julia Asylum, an institution for children with mental problems. Her father paid for her maintenance, but never visited her. What kind of treatment did she receive? Isabel asked, fearing the answer. In 1901, treatment for childhood trauma was primitive, Dr. Farah replied. It mainly consisted of isolation, strict discipline, and the hope that the child would overcome the condition with time. Isabel examined the additional documents. Is there any record of what happened to her afterward? That's the most disturbing part, Dr. Farah said. Mercedes remained in the asylum until 1918. She was 27 years old when she was finally released, but there are no records of what happened to her after her release. 17 years institutionalized, Isabel said, unable to hide her horror. Girls who entered these institutions rarely left, especially when their families wanted to keep them hidden. Mercedes had essentially grown up in the asylum without family, proper education, or opportunity. Dr. Farah showed Isabel a final entry. There's a note from the asylum director dated 1918. It says, Mercedes had developed skills as a seamstress and was quiet and obedient. She was released to work as a domestic employee. Isabel felt overwhelmed by the tragedy of the story. Is it possible Mercedes still had living descendants? It's possible, but very difficult to trace, Dr. Farah replied. Women who left these institutions often changed their names and tried to hide their past. It would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Belle packed her notes, determined to find some trace of Mercedes Vidal. The girl in the photograph deserved to have her story told. She decided to approach the search from a different angle. Instead of relying solely on official records, Isabel began investigating domestic employment, archives, and seamstress registries from Barcelona in the 1920s and 1930s. Her research led her to Maria Casals, a local historian specializing in the working lives of women in 20th century Barcelona. Maria had spent years collecting oral testimonies from working families across the city. Mercedes Vidal. That name sounds familiar, Maria said as she reviewed her archives. Wait, yes, here it is. One of the women I interviewed in the 1980s mentioned a seamstress named Mercedes who worked in the Carrera family workshop. Maria pulled out an audio recording from an interview conducted in 1987. This is Rosa Carrera. She was 95 years old when I interviewed her. She spoke about her family's employees when she was young. Isabel listened to Rosa Carrera's fragile voice. Mercedes was a very quiet woman, very hardworking. She came to work with us in 1920, when I was about 28 years old. She never talked about her family, never received letters, but she had terrible nightmares at night. The recording continued. Mercedes was very skilled with sewing, but there was something sad about her. Sometimes, when she saw small children, she would stare at them with an expression of pain. My mother said Mercedes had suffered something terrible in her childhood. Isabel felt she was getting closer to Mercedes. Are there more details about her? Maria let the interview continue. Mercedes worked with the Carrera family until 1935. Rosa says she married a man named Antonio Rivas, a shoemaker from the Gracia neighborhood. She changed her name to Mercedes Rivas. Did they have children? Isabel asked. According to Rosa, yes, a daughter named Carmen, born in 1936. But the family was separated during the Civil War. Antonio died in 1938, and Mercedes disappeared with the girl. Isabel took careful notes. Is there any clue about what happened to Mercedes and her daughter after 1938? Isabel asked. Maria reviewed additional archives. There may be. In my research on Civil War refugees, I found references to a woman named Mercedes Rivas who moved to France with a small girl in 1939. France. Yes, many families fled there during the war. But here's what's interesting. In 1942, there's a record of Mercedes Rivas returning to Spain without the girl. According to the document, she stated that her daughter had died of tuberculosis in a French refugee camp. Isabel felt a mixture of sadness and frustration. So it's possible Mercedes survived into the 1940s. It's possible, Maria replied. But after 1942, the trail goes completely cold. It's as if she disappeared again. Isabel remained silent, processing the information. Mercedes had escaped the institution, found work, married, and had a daughter. Yet, the war had destroyed her new life. Just as family violence had destroyed her childhood. Maria, is there any possibility that Carmen, Mercedes' daughter, survived in France? It's possible. Records from that era are incomplete, and many families gave children false names to protect them. It would be difficult to trace, but not impossible. Isabel decided her next step was to investigate French archives. If Carmen Rivas had survived, she might have descendants still alive, and they deserved to know the true story of their grandmother, Mercedes. She contacted Pierre Dubois, a historian specializing in Spanish refugees in France during the Civil War. Pierre worked in the departmental archives of Arles, where many Spanish families had sought refuge. Mercedes Rivas. Yes, I have records of her, Pierre confirmed after checking his files. She arrived in France in February 1939 with a 3-year-old girl. They were interned in the Argelès-sur-Mer camp. Isabelle felt both excitement and apprehension. What else can you tell me about her time in France? Pierre consulted several documents. Mercedes worked as a seamstress in a textile factory near Perpignan. According to the records, she was an exemplary employee. The supervisors noted she was extremely introverted and seemed to live in constant fear of authorities. And her daughter, Carmen. Here's where the story becomes complicated, Pierre replied. Carmen became ill with tuberculosis in 1941. She was admitted to a children's sanatorium in the Pyrenees. But according to medical records, she recovered completely and was discharged in 1942. Isabelle felt confused. Then why did Mercedes say her daughter had died? That's the mystery. In 1942, Mercedes returned to Spain alone, claiming Carmen had died. But the sanatorium records indicate Carmen was transferred to an orphanage in Toulouse, where she remained until 1945. An orphanage. Why would Mercedes abandon her daughter? Pierre paused, choosing his words carefully. Based on similar cases, I believe Mercedes made a desperate decision. She may have thought Carmen would have better opportunities in France than returning to Spain with a traumatized mother who had no resources. Isabelle felt deep sadness for Mercedes. What happened to Carmen after 1945? She was adopted by a French family, the Morats. She changed her name to Carmen Marot and grew up as a French girl. According to records, she never knew her mother had returned to Spain. Carmen Marot. She died in 1995, but she had 3 children. Her eldest son, Jean-Paul Marot, still lives in Toulouse. He's a retired history professor. Isabelle realized she had found the final piece of the puzzle. Would it be possible to contact him? I could try, Pierre said, but you should prepare for the possibility that this family knows nothing about Carmen's Spanish past. It could be very shocking for them. I understand, Isabelle replied, but they deserve to know the truth about their mother, and Mercedes deserves to have her sacrifice recognized. Pierre promised to contact Jean-Paul Marot. Call. Isabelle realized she was on the verge of reconnecting a family separated by violence, and the desperate decisions of a traumatized mother. Pierre, one more question, Isabelle said. Is there any record of what Carmen knew about her Spanish past? According to the orphanage file, Carmen vaguely remembered her mother and spoke Spanish when she was little, but she gradually lost both the memories and the language. It's possible she retained fragments, but probably never understood the full meaning of her story. Isabelle ended the call with mixed emotions. She had found Mercedes' descendants, but also uncovered another layer of tragedy. Jean-Paul Marot, 78 years old, agreed to meet Isabelle at his home in Toulouse. Pierre Dubois had carefully prepared him for the conversation, explaining that Isabelle had uncovered important information about his mother's Spanish origins. My mother never spoke about her childhood, Jean-Paul said as he served coffee in his living room. She told us she grew up in an orphanage and had no family. But sometimes, when she was very relaxed, she sang songs in Spanish that we could never identify. Isabelle showed him the original 1901 photograph of Catalina and Mercedes. This is your grandmother, Mercedes, when she was 10 years old, beside her sister, Catalina. Jean-Paul studied the image carefully. My God, there's an obvious family resemblance. My mother had the same eyes, the same serious expression. He paused, looking more closely. But there's something disturbing about this photograph. These girls don't look happy. Belle explained the entire story. Catalina's illness, the signs of abuse, Mercedes' admission to the asylum, her eventual escape and new life, and finally her decision to leave Carmen in France. Mother grew up in a mental institution, Jean-Paul asked, visibly shaken. It wasn't exactly a mental institution, Isabel clarified. It was more an asylum for children considered problematic. Tetis was admitted after developing severe trauma following her sister's death and possibly ongoing family abuse. Jean-Paul remained silent for several minutes, absorbing the revelation. This explains many things about my mother. She could never speak about difficult emotions. She had frequent nightmares and was always afraid of authorities. You have any belongings of your mother that might have come from Spain? Spell asked. Jean-Paul went to a closet and brought out a small wooden box. This is the only thing my mother kept from her childhood. She never explained what it was, but she guarded it like a treasure. Inside the box was an old religious medal and a piece of lace that appeared to have come from a child's dress. Isabel recognized it immediately. This lace matches the dresses in the 1901 photograph. It's a fragment of Mercedes' dress. Your mother managed to preserve a piece of her childhood, despite everything. Jean-Paul's eyes filled with tears. Do you think my mother remembered her sister? I'm certain she did, Isabel said. This lace proves Mercedes never completely forgot her life before the asylum. She kept it as a link to Catalina and to the girl she once was. Jean-Paul called his two brothers in Paris. They deserved to hear this story, too. Our mother lived a far more complex and tragic life than we ever imagined. There's one more thing you should know, Isabel added. Your grandmother. Mercedes made an incredibly brave decision by leaving Carmen in France. She knew she couldn't offer her a stable life in Spain, but she wanted her to have opportunities she herself never had. Jean-Paul nodded slowly, beginning to understand his grandmother's sacrifice. Do you think Mercedes thought about Carmen after returning to Spain? I have no proof, Isabel replied, but everything I've learned suggests she thought about her daughter every day. The fact that she kept that lace shows she never stopped being a mother, even after making the hardest decision of her life. Isabel returned to Barcelona with a new mission: to uncover the final years of Mercedes Vidal's life. She now knew Mercedes had returned to Spain in 1942. But what happened after she left her daughter in France remained unclear. She contacted Dr. Farah at the Charity Archives and explained the new discoveries. Dr. Farah, I need to search for records of Mercedes Rivas between 1942 and 1950. We know she returned to Spain, but not where she ended up. These were extremely difficult years. Dr. Farah reflected. The post-war period brought severe poverty, especially for single women. Many ended up in charity institutions or working under terrible conditions. After several days of searching, they found a clue in the archives of the Hospital of the Holy Cross. Here it is, said Dr. Farah. Mercedes Rivas, admitted in November 1947 with severe pneumonia, age 56. Occupation, seamstress. Isabel examined the file. Did she recover? Yes, Dr. Farah replied. But there's a note from the hospital chaplain. It says Mercedes frequently spoke about a daughter she had given up for adoption to save her. She seemed obsessed with the idea that she had done the right thing. They continued searching and uncovered more records. Mercedes had worked as a seamstress in several Barcelona workshops until 1952. After that, there were no more official documents. But there's something else, Dr. Farah said, showing another record. The Montjuic Cemetery archives list a Mercedes Rivas who died in 1955. She was buried in a common grave, with no family present. Isabel felt a deep sadness. A common grave was typical for those without family or resources. There's a note from the gravedigger, Dr. Farah continued. It says Mercedes left a small suitcase with her belongings at the boarding house where she lived. The owner donated the contents to charity. Is there any chance those belongings still exist? Isabel asked. Dr. Farah consulted her files. Possibly the 1950s. The charity kept a warehouse where personal objects of the deceased were stored in case family members came forward. Some of those items may have survived. After hours of searching in the archive basement, they found a box labeled Emiras 1955. Isabel opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were only a few items, several unsent letters addressed to "My dear Carmen," a small photo album, and most surprisingly a copy of the original 1901 photograph of Catalina and Mercedes. Mercedes kept this photograph her entire life, Isabel murmured, comparing the worn image with the one she had found in the Vidal mansion. She never stopped remembering her sister. The unsent letters were heartbreaking. In one dated 1948, Mercedes had written, "My dear Carmen, I hope you are growing up happy in France. I pray every day that you have the life I could never give you. I hope that one day you can forgive your mother for abandoning you." In another letter from 1952, she wrote, "Carmen, today you would have turned 16. I imagine you speaking French, studying, becoming an educated young woman. I did right by leaving you there. Here you would not have had a future." Tears filled Isabel's eyes. Mercedes had lived her final years tormented by guilt, yet convinced she had made the right decision for her daughter. "Dr. Farah, is there any way to locate Mercedes' grave?" Isabel asked. "I can try," Dr. Farah replied. "Even though it's a common grave, there should be a record of its exact location." Isabel knew what she had to do. Mercedes deserved to be properly remembered, and her story needed to be reunited with that of her daughter and grandchildren in France. "I'm going to contact Jean-Paul Moreau," Isabel decided. "He deserves to know how his grandmother's story ends, and I believe he'll want to honor her memory." Dr. Farah smiled. "Isabel, you've accomplished something extraordinary. You reunited a family torn apart by violence and circumstance, and you gave a voice to a woman who suffered in silence throughout her life." 3 months later, Isabel organized a commemorative ceremony at Montjuic Cemetery. Jean-Paul Moreau and his 2 brothers traveled from France, bringing photographs of Carmen and their own families. Mercedes' common grave had been located and marked with a dignified headstone. "Today, we honor not only Mercedes Vidal, but also her sister Catalina," Isabel said to the small gathering. 2 girls who suffered terrible injustices, whose story has finally been rescued from oblivion. Jean-Paul placed flowers on Mercedes' grave. "My grandmother lived a life of extraordinary sacrifice. She lost her sister, endured abuse and forced institutionalization, yet managed to rebuild her life and make the hardest decision a mother can make to give up her daughter so she might have a better future." The Morrow brothers brought the piece of lace Carmen had preserved, along with the unsent letters Mercedes had written. "We want these letters to stay with our grandmother," explained Philippe, Jean-Paul's younger brother. "She can finally rest knowing her daughter lived a happy life." Isabel had prepared a small photographic memorial showing the full story, the original 1901 photograph, images of Mercedes in France, photographs of Carmen with her French adoptive family, and, finally, images of Mercedes' grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The photograph that began this investigation showed us 2 girls in desperate circumstances, Isabel reflected. But it also revealed a story of resistance, survival, and maternal love that transcends generations. Mark, Jean-Paul's eldest grandson, had brought his own children to the ceremony. We want them to know the story of their great-great-grandmother, Mercedes. Her courage and sacrifice are part of our family heritage. The ceremony ended with Jean-Paul reading one of the letters Mercedes had written, but never sent. "My dear Carmen, if you've ever read this, I want you to know that every decision I made was out of love. I hope you can forgive a mother who did the best she could with the circumstances life gave her." 6 months later, Isabel published a book about the story of the Vidal sisters. The proceeds were donated to organizations that support children suffering from abuse and trauma. The original 1901 photograph is now displayed at the Barcelona History Museum. accompanied by the documentation Isabel had gathered. This photograph reminds us that behind every historical image, there are complex human stories. Isabel wrote in the book's introduction, Catalina and Mercedes Vidal represent thousands of children who suffered in silence, but they also show us that love can endure through even the most difficult generations. The story of the Vidal sisters became a powerful testimony to the importance of protecting vulnerable children and honoring the memory of those who suffered injustice. Their photograph, once disturbing for the pain it revealed, had become a symbol of resistance and hope in France. The Morrow family established a scholarship in Mercedes Vidal's name to help young refugees. The legacy of a woman silenced by the society of her time finally resonated as a voice of hope for future generations. And in Barcelona, whenever Isabel passed the old Vidal mansion, now a museum, she remembered that old photographs are more than images. They are windows into lives that deserve to be remembered, stories that must be told, and lessons that must be learned to build a more compassionate future.